Welcome to our Women's History Month event. I'm Dr. Camille Moreno, and my gender pronouns are she, her. I'm the System Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Access. Some of you know the Center for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access here at PeaceHealth. I'm so excited to be here with all of you to celebrate Women's History Month. This year's theme, Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories, calls us to celebrate the women who keep our history alive through storytelling. At the same time, we celebrate the storytellers in our own communities and lives, mothers, sisters, friends, and caregivers too, that have inspired us to do more and to be more. Those women include the nearly 80% of our PeaceHealth workforce who are women and incredible members of our very own caregiver resource group, Crown, that works tirelessly to create an equitable and inclusive community for all women. Crown, it's my pleasure to work alongside you. Please join me to share the reflection of the day.
Thank you for the warm introduction, Dr. Moreno. We're honored to work alongside you too. Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Castle, and I am a co-chair of Crown. As Dr. Moreno briefly shared, Crown is committed to empowering all patients and caregivers who identify as women, driving PeaceHealth toward gender equity, and supporting the complexities of each woman's role inside and outside of the workplace. This month, we're hosting fun events, wellness challenges, and special speakers for our Crown members and allies. We'd love for more people to get involved. If you're interested in joining an environment where female voices and contributions are welcomed, valued, and heard, please send us a note using the email address I'll post in the chat. Summer, would you like to continue our welcome?
Thank you, Annie. Hi, everyone. My name is Summer Meyer, and I am also a co-chair of Crown, our Women's Caregiver Resource Group. Today, we're offering our virtual attendees a giveaway of an autographed copy of Lelia Bundle's book. All you have to do is stay until the end of the program, and we'll do a drawing from the list of attendees, and then we'll email that winner after the program. Next, I'd like to transition to our reflection for today. At PeaceHealth, one of our traditions that we carry on from our founding sisters is to start our meetings with a reflection or a blessing. Today, we selected a quote from Grace Lee Boggs in alignment with the theme of Women's History Month. Grace said, "History is not the past. It is the stories we tell about the past. How we tell these stories, triumphantly or self-critically, metaphysically or dialectically, has a lot to do with whether we cut short or advance our evolution as human beings." Thank you. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Moreno.
Thank you. It's an absolute privilege and honor to welcome our guest today, Alelia Bundles. Alelia Bundles is the author of On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker, a New York Times notable book about her entrepreneurial great-great-grandmother and the inspiration of Self-Made, the fictional Netflix series starring Octavia Spencer. She's the founder of the Madam Walker Family Archives, the largest private collection of Walker photographs and memorabilia, and brand historian for Madame by Madam C.J. Walker, a line of hair products developed in partnership with Sundial Brands and Walmart. She serves on several nonprofit boards, including the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America at Harvard's Radcliffe Institute, the March on Washington Film Festival, Columbia Global Reports, Indiana Landmarks, and the Smithsonian's American Women's History Initiative. A former network television executive and Emmy Award-winning producer at ABC News and NBC News, and the chair emerita of the National Archives Foundation. Welcome, Alelia.
Delighted to be with you, Camille.
I am very excited, and as I said earlier, a little bit geeking out over here by myself in my office. Alelia, it's without a doubt, your work speaks for itself. As a storyteller that continues to share stories of individuals that has shaped the narrative of history, I'm truly curious about your story. Tell us a little bit about you and what inspired you to be a storyteller.
Well, when I was growing up, my mother was vice president of the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. So I would go with her to her office. So I knew that somewhere in the distance I had a famous great-great-grandmother, but it really was the last thing on my mind. The silverware that we used every day had her monogram. The baby grand piano that I learned to read music on had belonged to her daughter, Alelia Walker, who was part of the Harlem Renaissance. But my real passion was writing. And at 8 years old, I had a little article, a little short story that was published about people going to the moon 9 years before Neil Armstrong was on the moon. So I saw myself as a writer and not as somebody who was, following in my mother's footsteps or my father's footsteps, who also worked in hair care. So I really worked on the school newspaper and began to develop that identity for myself. But when I got to graduate school in journalism at Columbia University in 1975, a long time ago, my advisor, Phyllis Garland, was the only Black woman on the faculty, and she recognized my unusually spelled name, which people can see there, A' capital Lelia. And after I gave her some lame topics for my master's paper, she said, your name is Alelia. Do you have any connection to Madam Walker and her daughter, Alelia Walker? And I said, yeah, that's my family. And she said, that's what you're going to write about. So that set me on the path to combining both my interest in journalism and then this sort of avocation about writing about them that has now become really my life's work.
I am so happy that you went down that path. I think all of us have surely benefited from all of that. And I just want to mention like how the way you tell the story with your with your professor, your advisor, and the humility with which, like you say, yeah, that's my family, and just want to share with everybody, that has been my experience of you this whole time as we've been preparing for today. Your humility just shows, it just comes through. It's one can feel it. Thank you so much.
If Camille, if I could just say something, like it's our parents who I think really shape how we view the world. Now, that's not to say you can't, sometimes you do the opposite of what your parents want you to do. But my mom had to wear kind of the, and not so much a burden, but she was really identified as Madam Walker's great granddaughter. And she was very smart and very accomplished, but she didn't want me to have to feel that I had to live up to something. And so I really credit her with giving me that way of approaching the world.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. As shared, you were a producer and executive with ABC News and NBC shows. What pivotal moments in your TV career helped shape the way you approached writing On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker?
Well, as I say, I had these sort of parallel lives where on vacations and holidays and weekends, I was doing research for these books that I was writing. And then a pretty demanding career in network television news where, at that point, it was before telephones, before cell phones. Your beeper would go off and you get sent to a hurricane or a grain elevator explosion or something shot out of a cannon, as we used to say. But while I was becoming a producer and working behind the scenes, I was learning how to tell stories, and I was learning how to tell stories visually. So I think this combination of writing under deadline, telling stories, trying to figure out what sound bites, in a sense, what quotations would interest people, really helped shape the way that I write books.
Wow, without a doubt, the ability to tell stories is a powerful talent that keeps our history alive. So can you share more about the life of Madam C.J. Walker and how her story has shaped her history?
Right. So listen, I will add a little something before I talk about her. And it is that, how did I learn to be a storyteller. The television experience helped me, but there are a couple of other people in my life who were great storytellers. My grandfather, my mother's father, was born in 1892, and he had been, his very unusually, his parents had gone to college. His mother went to Oberlin. His father went to a Black university in Pennsylvania called Lincoln University. He was valedictorian of his class, but he had been born just right at the end of slavery. So, but very educated people. And my grandfather became a lawyer, and he also had gone to Lincoln, but he was a great storyteller. He was a great historian in a sense, and he helped me have a sense of history. Then I was very fortunate to have Alex Haley as a mentor. Alex Haley, who people will recognize as the person who wrote the book Roots and the miniseries. But Alex, I was doing research because Alex was going to write a book about Madam Walker and do a miniseries. He never finished it, but I was fortunate to be around him and to just listen to him as he spoke to audiences. So I owe both of them a debt in terms of storytelling, in addition to what I learned in television. But for Madam Walker, for those who may have heard of her, so you may think of her as a person who developed hair care products, and that is in fact sort of the basis of the story. But the brief, my sort of elevator version of her long, complicated story is that she was born on the same plantation in Louisiana where her parents and older siblings had been enslaved. Orphaned at 7, both parents died, moved in with an older sister whose husband was abusive. And so Sarah Breedlove, her birth name, said, I got married at 14 to get a home of my own to escape the cruel brother-in-law. She married a man named Moses McWilliams, had a daughter when she was 17. Moses died when she was 20. She moved up the river, Mississippi River, to St. Louis, where her older brothers had moved a decade earlier as part of an early Black migration to the north. And they had become barbers. Their barbershop was very near St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church. Long reputation in the church for teaching African Americans, for educated leadership. And those women in the church, in the choir, and the missionary society, began to give Sarah Breedlove a vision of herself as something other than an illiterate washerwoman. So fast forward, she learns from these women who mentor her. She begins to lose her hair, finds a formula for her wonderful hair grower that heals scalp disease. And then she begins to train other women. And by the time she dies in 1919, at age 51, she's living in a mansion in Irvington, New York, the wealthiest community in America, and has employed tens of thousands of women and become a philanthropist and a contributor to the anti-lynching movement.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. One of our core values here at PeaceHealth is social justice. Do you have any stories to share about Madam Walker's contributions to civil rights and social justice? I mean, you were mentioning a little bit right now, but we'd love to hear more about that.
Well, when I started doing my research, it was the story that a lot of people knew. Madam Walker made hair care products, but it was really my discovery of her involvement as a leader among women that has sustained my interest in her. And I began to realize she saw social justice movements in a sense when she was a child. Her family minister had been a state senator in Louisiana during Reconstruction, but they were sort of chased out by the Ku Klux Klan. So she saw that sort of racial violence even as a young child. She never spoke about it or wrote about it, but that was something I discovered in my research. And then her involvement in the AME church was another place where she began to, those seeds were planted. But as she became wealthier and as she became more involved in the leadership among African-American women and men, she saw that there was a real need to be able to speak up, that it wasn't just about making money, it was about using your wealth and using your influence to make a difference. So she became friends with Ida B. Wells Barnett, who we know was very much involved in the anti-lynching movement. She became a member of the NAACP. And so one sort of galvanizing moment for her, there was a big massacre during the summer of 1917 in East St. Louis. A number of African Americans were killed. And it turned into a massive protest in New York. There was something called the Silent Protest Parade, where 10,000 African Americans marched silently up Fifth Avenue. And it was very similar in a way to the groundswell that happened in 2020 after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But Madam Walker was one of the organizers. So at her convention of her sales agents that same summer, she said to the women in her keynote, I want you to understand that your first duty is to humanity. I want others to look at us and realize that we care not just about ourselves, but about others. She gave prizes at that convention to the women who sold the most products, but also the women who had contributed the most to charity. And at the end of the convention, the women sent a telegram to President Woodrow Wilson urging him to support legislation to make lynching a federal crime. Her attorney was very worried about her being so outspoken, but she said, my money comes from Black women. I want to advocate for them to be economically independent, for them to have civil rights.
That's so powerful and resonates so deeply with, I think, I mean, in some ways, like the story of how PeaceHealth came to be and was founded by two sisters, two nuns, but who were also like rebellious, or maybe rebellious is not the right word, but really committed to their cause, and in this case, in healthcare, but women helping women, supporting women, and being and fighting for our rights. We have deep roots and a shared history in that sense, and I really appreciate that you're hearing.
Well, so when you say rebellious, so women, anytime women speak up for themselves, that sometimes makes other people nervous, but so much positive change comes from realizing your own power, but I think the point here is using your power to make someone else's life better. That's when women speak up most effectively.
Yes, no, thank you for that. Thank you. So in 2020, Netflix released the series Self-Made, starring Octavia Spencer as Madam C.J. Walker. While this exponentially propelled the reach of Madam Walker's story to millions of people around the world, you've said the film also reinforced your belief that projects involving historical figures need scholars, biographers, and journalists in the writer's room. What aspects of her story are missing in the film that you'd love our audience today to know?
No, absolutely. So let me just say, Octavia Spencer was great. I was so excited when she was the actor who was chosen to do this. And even now, every time I see it, when she comes on screen, I feel as if she is really bringing the dignity and respect to the character that she personally, I know, appreciates Madam Walker's legacy. And I will also say to those who think Blair Underwood is handsome and who enjoyed seeing him, he is also a very lovely man. And so it has been, a joy to be able to get to know him as well. There were so many people who worked really hard on that, from the set designers to the costume designers to all of the, just people who were so excited to work on the project. But it is a Hollywood production. And as a person who does a lot of historical research to try to educate people about things that we didn't learn in school, there were a lot of things that I would have done differently. So just a couple of them. When I first talked with the writer, I had my book was optioned. I had what was called script review, which meant they had to show me the scripts, but I didn't have script veto. So I could make suggestions, but I couldn't control how the storyline went. And when the writer and I had our first conversation, she said she wanted to, use the kind of cliche of two women in a cat fight, essentially in competition with each other. And I said, I think that's part of the story, but I would not make that the centerpiece. But she didn't like what I said. And so that's the way she went. And I was really where I envisioned kind of the hidden figures, the sort of the uplifting, even though, you got to have conflict to make a story. but I feel sometimes like I got Real Housewives of Atlanta. So that was not kind of my envision, because Madam Walker's story is a story of women empowering women. And then just a couple of other things. Madam Walker's attorney, F.B. Ransom, was really a straight arrow who had taken a vow early in life to never drink, smoke, or gamble. But the character that they developed was, they made up a character who was not just the numbers runner, but a pimp. So that's kind of a stereotype that I would not, definitely would not have had, but also to have Mr. Ransom gambling when he was really a critical part of her executive team. And then finally, they made up a girlfriend for Alelia Walker. And I would say if that had been true, I would have been fine with it. But her real story is sort of much more interesting than a made up romance. It was really the real conflict between mother and daughter was two boyfriends, both handsome, both doctors, one a good guy, one a bad boy, and you know how that story goes.
Yes. Well, I too wish that they'd included all of that in the film, and I think I think many people in our audience would agree that that is something that would also have been even more interesting, like to really hear the truth about all of her experiences. You shared that by the time Walker died in 1919, she had founded a beauty empire, employed thousands of Black women, helped fund the NAACP's anti-lynching campaign, and she became a millionaire philanthropist. What lessons from her journey can we learn as a community?
Well, there's so many things that I think still resonate from her life. And part of it is education is key. She didn't have a lot of formal education, but she helped fund other people's education. She would have said the first thing you have to do is have a great product or service, and then you have to publicize that. So those are lessons that still make sense. Another part was her judgment about people, surrounding herself with really talented people to sort of shore up the deficits that she had. So, today we call it the C-suite, but she was really smart about that. She was very good at picking other people to support her. As she traveled, she would do a lecture. She was an early adopter of technology. She had something called a stereopticon that was like PowerPoint that had been invented by Thomas Edison, but she would travel and she'd give lectures to a large group of people and show Black businesses and schools and famous people. And then she would pull together a smaller group of women who were interested in being her sales agents. She talked to them about what it meant, but she would also see who asked the best questions and who did the other women gravitate towards, who had charisma, and she would make that person her lead agent. So she had those kinds of qualities. The other thing I would say is she was a master marketer. She advertised extensively in the Black newspapers, and she gave lectures. So I'm sure she'd be on TikTok and Instagram.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm excited for your next book too. But before I go there, in your book, you talk about being a biographer and always wanting to find out one more detail. As a storyteller, how do you know when to stop so a story is ready to be published?
Oh, you know what? You never stop. I think it's kind of an addiction that's, that finding that next little one more nugget, one more gem. Yeah. And it's so different now. When I first started doing this research many years ago, it was pre-internet. Pre-digitization. So if I wanted to look for a newspaper, the Chicago Defender, I'd have to go to Chicago, go to the library and look at microfilm. Wow. Now I can just log on to newspapers.com or genealogybank.com, and there's always one more question. So I'm always going down a rabbit hole. But yes, there is a point, it's a deadline that makes you stop when your editor says, where is that chapter? So that's when you have to stop. Yeah, that's true. It's so true.
but your thirst for that, and your quest for those details, and to expand and to be able to elaborate more on the stories is just really inspiring. And share with the group that earlier, when Crown Leadership and I and our producer were meeting with you, I think that's kind of one of the shared stories of Summer, if I may, just like how she also has become really interested in history by way of, as an adult, by way of, just looking at a little bit of history, and just how it really can take us down that rabbit hole, as you said, for learning more and more. Can you speak on Madame as a hair culturist and empowering self-esteem through taking care of yourself? How might her message 100 years ago advocate for inclusion for today's beauty standards?
So obviously there are European beauty standards and African beauty standards, Asian beauty standards, and and essentially colonization has made for many, many generations, European beauty standards really dictated the way the rest of the world and the rest of us saw ourselves. We saw ourselves through that lens. And when Madam Walker was starting out, I mean, as Sarah Breedlove, she was a poor washerwoman, poor uneducated washerwoman, no products that were really designed for her, and other people not saying that she was beautiful. But she, I think, took it upon herself to try to define beauty for Black women, and she put her own image on her products. That was really revolutionary, her own before and after pictures. That is not to say that she wasn't also influenced by this sort of European beauty standard and feeling that she, had to measure up. So that's always going to be a part of how we see ourselves because of the media, because of movies, because of the way that people interpret beauty standards. But I think she was, sort of paving a way to say, people would sort of criticize her for straightening hair. And she said, that's not my goal. At that point, when most Americans didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity, hygiene was very different. People had bad scalp infections. So she was losing her hair. So that was the foundation. But, fast forward 100 years, there's such an amazing array of beauty, the way that people express themselves, the Crown Act, to take the same name that the organization has, but the Crown Act that makes it now illegal to fire someone or to expel someone from school because they're wearing their natural hair, and being supported by major corporations and organizations. I think we're now in a period of time where expressing yourself, your hair is part of who you are. It's as much a part of your makeup as the clothing that you choose or the words that you choose to use. So I think we have come a long way in this century, and she is part of helping to pave that way.
That's wonderful, for sure. What was a surprising trait or life event you discovered about Madam C.J. Walker that wasn't highlighted before your book?
Well, just how much she really focused on economic independence for women. That the emphasis before was, build a hair care empire, made a lot of money. But what she saw, I think, in some ways, that the hair care products, yes, they filled a need. Women wanted the products, they wanted something for themselves. But as she trained women and traveled all over the United States, Central America, and the Caribbean, she saw that they wanted hair care products, but they needed education and economic independence, financial independence, so they could buy homes and educate their children. And then she helped turn that into political activism. So those pieces, yes, starts with a hair care product, but how she was able to use that and to use that platform to do other things.
That's great. I didn't realize that her reach was so far. I'm an immigrant myself from Belize, which is a small country at the crossroads of Central America and the Caribbean. And I just love, now I want to go dig in the history to learn more about what her influence may have been.
So Camille, she went to, in 1913, she went to Haiti, Jamaica, Costa Rica, Panama, and one other place that I'm forgetting. But
I'm
that
gonna
was,
say
yes,
Belize.
fast. It wasn't Belize, but she was close. But you know what? It was interesting to me that when she made that trip, it was with a Black opera singer who had traveled internationally. And so she was piggybacking on the friendship with someone, and it was
Yeah,
really people in entertainment,
yeah,
African Americans
yeah.
entertainment, who had traveled internationally. And she knew that, that helped her pave the way to move into that next arena.
Yeah, one of the joys of this too, is like just hearing and listening and realizing how much she had her fingers on the pulse of the community per se, like just that ability to kind of read the room per se, or like figure out who would be a person that could further like her pursuits as well, is just lovely to hear. Yeah. Well, I am super excited for your next book, The Joy Goddess of Harlem, Alelia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance. Tell us about this new book, and when can we look for it to be released?
I'm so excited to be almost finished with this book. So I'm editing the last 2 chapters. I've been working on it for an embarrassingly long period of time, but that's, it takes what it takes. But I'm so excited about getting Alelia Walker's story out there, because she has been kind of flattened and caricatured as kind of Madam Walker made the money, her daughter spent the money. So, nobody is that pathetic, but she did enjoy spending the money. But what is exciting to me about her, a couple of things that, as the daughter of a very famous, larger than life person, that's a struggle. You have to find your own way.
Yes.
And part of her way was persuading her mother that they needed to have a presence in Harlem. She had been running the Pittsburgh office in 1913. She persuaded her mother to buy a building in Harlem. And it was fortuitous because it was right as Harlem was becoming the Black cultural and political mecca. Then both women loved music from the time they were in St. Louis, where ragtime was born, where there were German musicians teaching in the school, becoming familiar with opera. Madam Walker, as Sarah Breedlove, was in the choir. So they loved music. But what Alelia Walker did was to turn that into being a patron of the arts. So her homes in Harlem during the 20s were the places where the artists and writers and musicians and actors loved to come. Her parties were some of the most iconic parties of the Harlem Renaissance.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's great. So I'm just going to ask about, a hot takeaway for our audience, if you will. Who are some women storytellers that we should be following right now?
Oh, wow. Well, Ava DuVernay, I just think is great. I just finished reading Octavia Butler's Kindred, decades later, I finally read it. But I love her writing. I just actually saw my friend Michelle Norris, who is a columnist for the Washington Post. And it's Michele Norris, who also had worked at NPR. We met each other at ABC. She is such a fabulous writer, but she focuses a lot on current events. So I would urge people to Google her, read her. Former First Lady Michelle Obama is such a great writer and a great storyteller. I think I tend to read a lot of nonfiction, but thank goodness for my book club that I read fiction there as well. But those are just a few that come off the top of my head.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Okay, so now we'll turn to the Q&A portion of today's event, if you don't mind. And so, if there's anybody who has a question, please feel free to use the Q&A tool in our Zoom to ask questions. I know that there was also somebody who was a part of our panel. I believe it was Annie, who said she had some questions. Annie, if you don't mind, please go ahead with your questions.
Dr. Moreno, you already answered a few of them. So
Okay,
thank you.
that's
Yeah.
okay. That's okay. I actually have
Okay.
another question.
I do have one more.
Okay, go ahead.
If
Go
I
ahead.
can ask, thank you.
Yes, go ahead and
What I love about the story is Madam C.J. Walker has inspired women by helping other women. How can we take that lesson and use it today? How do you personally take that lesson and use it today as a storyteller?
Oh, it's such a great question. And I was just in a meeting with two women that I admire a great deal, Michelle Norris and Soledad O'Brien. Both have large platforms and they are so supportive of other women. They are really great girlfriends. And I noticed this in my book club. There are 11 of us who have been in a book club since 2009. And we're now at the stage where some are having health problems. And so that's on a really personal level, but just being a good girlfriend is so important. That's kind of the micro level. But on a larger level, it's really, looking at the women who are in your workplace, who, seeing people not just as the person who's, doing the work output, but seeing the person as a human being who, might have some vulnerabilities and who needs your support. And I think also just being involved in women's organizations and the kinds of things that you're doing now, so that you're really listening to other people's stories, but supporting them when they're doing well and shoring them up when they're facing challenges.
that's great. We have a question from somebody in the audience, and he says, what would you tell your younger self?
So here's what I tell my younger self. Pay attention to your father who said you really need to learn another language, but I was too, I don't know, didn't want to get up at 7 o'clock to go to the language classes. So I wish I had taken my father's advice for that. And the other thing, if I had done that, then I would have during my career, I would have lived overseas. I wish that I had taken the opportunity to live somewhere other than the United States, so that I would have had that experience in living overseas.
Yeah, great advice to your younger self. And maybe this helps the person who asked the second part of that question was, as a father to two Black girls, how do I affirm and encourage them to keep going?
I'm so fortunate that I had a dad like this person who wants to encourage his daughters. And my father was always my biggest fan. It's not that we agreed on everything, though. Let me be clear about that, because that's what's normal. But he really was my biggest cheerleader. And when I wanted to be a writer and, not sort of follow in the footsteps, there was never any pressure for that. It was always, how can we support you doing the thing that you love? And that was just really important to me. And I'm going to tell this quick story about my dad. Now, it's not that he didn't try to push me in some directions, because he did do that, but he was very wise about it. When I was trying to pick colleges, I grew up in Indianapolis, solid Midwest. But we went to New York a couple of times on vacation. And of course, the girl from Indianapolis was in love with New York and the energy of New York. And I wanted to go to college in New York. My dad did not want me to be 18 years old in New York. And so he worked some, mental jujitsu on me. And he really wanted me to go to Harvard, to Radcliffe. And so we went on the college trip, my dad and me together. We went to New York. And the first night we went to this fancy club called the Copacabana, and we saw Gladys Knight and the Pips. Wow. But the next morning before my interview, we went to what was called an automat. It was like you put a quarter in a machine and you get a sandwich or you get eggs. It was just before McDonald's, it was a version of fast food. And he said to me, when we're in New York on vacation, we have vacation money. But when you're in college, you don't have vacation money. So I was like, oh yeah, fine. And then the next day we went to Boston, and it was a beautiful day. And, the boats were on the Charles, and it was warmer than it usually would be at that time of year. And even up to the time when I was accepting, I was still weighing these things, but he made me do that thing you do with the 2 columns, the pros and cons. And he was absolutely right. His wisdom was right, even though I was dismissing it. And I went to school in New York, but that was when I was 24.
Oh,
So dads are really wise, but you sometimes have to trick your children.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing about your father. Can you share a bit more about the early stages of your career as a young woman in journalism? What were the victories? What were the challenges?
I'm so fortunate that I came along when I did. When I graduated from college in 1974, so I know that's ancient history. And I finished Columbia's journalism school in 1976. And it was at that moment where doors were opening for women and people of color that had not been opened before. And women had sued the networks and some of the major news organizations, so that period of time, young women would be hired as researchers and secretaries. Young men would be hired as desk assistants, entry-level positions, and assistant producers. And the young women would remain secretaries and researchers, and the guys would be on a career path to be senior producer, executive producer, president of the network. So that was disrupted by the lawsuits. And I was a recipient of that experience, that I was able to walk through those doors and to be on a path to become a producer. So, and I was really fortunate to have great mentors, many men who helped me. I went to a small bureau. All of the guys, I was like the only female producer in that bureau, but they taught me the things I needed to know. They supported me when I made mistakes. They helped me move on to the next level. I could have had a different experience, but I'm really fortunate that I came along when I did.
Yeah, yeah. What's your advice to organizations that want to drive equity and equality for women?
Do you just have to, what are the skills that people are bringing, and pay attention to them? Recognize that everybody doesn't do things exactly the same way, but when you have someone smart who's in the room, make sure that you acknowledge that. Don't pretend that somebody else, the sort of classic thing that a woman says something and a guy says something, they said the same thing, but she doesn't get credit for it. I mean, just really be conscious of how you're responding to people. If someone is not speaking up, why are they not speaking up? Maybe they weren't comfortable. Maybe you didn't make them comfortable in that particular setting. Ask them later. Encourage them to speak up. I mean, those things are really pretty basic. I've noticed, I just came from this meeting on a board, and the board had not been very diverse. So we made a very conscious effort. And today we had 5 new board members. I mean, a wide range of people who joined, but the energy and the skills and the experiences, that everyone is an A+ nomination to that board. But it took some looking and some being open-minded to do that.
Yes, yes. No, I appreciate hearing that so much. So what are some stories during your television career that left a mark in your personal and professional life?
So the things that come to mind, I covered a lot of hurricanes. So, and climate change has really, made that more intense. I covered the child murders in Atlanta. That was really a harrowing experience. But I would say among the things that really stand out for me, in 1984, I was a producer covering Jesse Jackson's campaign. And of course, we traveled through all of the primaries and the Democratic Convention in San Francisco. We also went to Cuba, Nicaragua, and El Salvador, which was, off the beaten path for a campaign. And then I covered Geraldine Ferraro's campaign for vice president. So those are things that stand out for me.
Yeah, yeah. What advice do you have for non-writers on how to document or tell our own stories?
Well, I really, one of the things that I've learned from doing this research on my own family is that everybody's family has interesting people, interesting
sure.
characters. And I really encourage people to learn their family story. You don't necessarily have to be the one who writes it, but gathering the information. And especially for younger generations, because, you know, even children know how to use smartphones better than we do. But when you are around an older member of your family, every time you're around them, encourage the youngest person in the room to take out that smartphone and just ask them one or two questions. Over time, you will gather a body of material, and you don't have to write it down. Now you've got it on audio and on video, so save that. But the other thing, I got some really great advice from Alex Haley, and this is, you know, for a writer, but maybe you're saving it. Maybe you're not the one who writes it. Maybe you're saving it for your child or your grandchild to be the writer. But here's what Alex told me. He said, make a folder, buy a bunch of manila folders, buy some hanging folders and a milk crate that you can get at the office supply. Make a folder for every year of the person's life. So if you're writing about your great-grandparent or your grandparent, just make a folder. And over time, if you think of something, you see an article, you print something out from the internet, drop it in the appropriate folder. Make a folder with the names of the family members, drop the material in, make a folder for the cities where they live, just keep that. Well, I will tell you, I won't turn my computer around, but 2 rooms of my house have now become that filing system. But
Wow.
That's what allows me to write the books that I write, because the material is organized.
That's such great advice. Thank you so much. I think I have one more question that I would like to ask. That's, as a storyteller, what are some ways you combat writer's block?
Oh, I don't know. I procrastinate and then I go to the gym and but I have a sign that's posted up on my bulletin board, and it says, "The muse most of us really need." And it has a stick figure holding a gun to the head of the writer saying,
"Oh no,
write the darn story." So, I don't know that I have writer's block so much. I mean, sometimes I'll go down a rabbit hole, and that'll get me back on track. But right now, I just really want to finish this book.
Yeah. I bet, and we're eager to learn more about it. I actually I see another question come up. If you had the opportunity to do a second film covering Madam Walker's story, and you got to choose the crew, who is your dream director, dream executive producer, and dream lead script writer?
That's a really interesting question. Demaine Davis was one of the directors. She directed 2 episodes, and I really liked working with her. I mean, I like her sensibilities. While Blair Underwood we know him as an actor, he also is doing some executive producing, and I would enjoy working with him again. But I'm actually working on a couple of other projects. I can't talk about the details on that. And we're working on selecting the right writer. There are a lot of really great writers now. They're all really, really, really busy. But I just know I wanted to develop a relationship with a writer. I really trust that I am a person who writes biography, who writes nonfiction, who does a lot of research, but that there is a different set of skills for a screenwriter, that they can take the work that I've done as a foundation and then infuse their own skills on how you bring that to the screen. And so I really trust an experienced writer to do that, and to maybe ask me questions if I think the feeling of it is right. But I would understand that you should not dictate what someone else is doing, that you bring a body of material and let the other person's talents flourish, which is the way that I had hoped this other experience would be. But that's what I'm striving for as we go on to the next project.
Oh, that's beautiful. And my wish for you is that that comes to that comes to fruition. Um, when can we expect your autobiography? That's my last question.
You know, I really have said that I'm not going to write about myself, but but I am telling my story in other ways. I don't. Here's the truth. I don't ever want to write another book.
Oh, oh no.
Because the writing a book for me, because I'm doing this virgin territory of discovering new information, is so all consuming. And I really would like the next decade of my life to be reading other people's books, traveling, hanging out with my friends. I feel
Yes.
like I've earned that. But I do, even if it's just on Instagram or Facebook, I'm telling my story all the time. So I feel like it's out there. And so maybe I might write some long poems.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, and yes, of course, you deserve all the time to travel and to hang out with your friends and do all the fun things in life and that life has to offer. So my wish for you is that as
Thank you.
well. Yes. Alilia, thank you so much for being our guest speaker today. We've been so honored to host you and really feel blessed with all of what the teachings that you've offered and how much you shared of yourself. I'd also love to thank Crown, the Markham team, and of course our fabulous Brands and L Collective who helped bring this event to life. We appreciate all your hard work and support. Thanks everybody for joining today. Again, I am Dr. Camille Moreno, your new System Director for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Access here at PeaceHealth, and I'm excited to continue serving all of you. Thank you so, so much. Thanks everybody for sharing your time with us today.